Today, I'm having a pretty important conversation with my father. It is a conversation that we've had loosely and over, I guess, the last 10 years of our life of just,
Mhm.
kind of working on our relationship more than ever. But I thought this was an awesome time to have him come on this podcast and just have a conversation about how I've understood men, my father, fatherhood, manhood, and all these things that come with our relationship. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about the evolution from boyhood to manhood through my POV, have some POV from my father, and ask some tough questions and just kind of share, how I grew up and the way I look at the world and the struggles I had, but hopefully help anyone out there that's, thinking of having some conversations with their dad or just want some more insight into the relationship they have with their dad or people who are potentially going to be a dad, especially the men in this world who may need to hear some things like this. So that's the point of this conversation. I'm so happy you can join me. This is Bill Noble. For those who don't know who my dad is, Billy Noble, William Francis Noble Jr.
Junior.
And I guess to start, what I wanted to do was just kind of give a little background of who we are. I'll let my dad introduce himself, and then we'll kind of get into this conversation that I've been really keen on having because I've been learning a lot as a man as I can reflect on my life and on our relationship and the idea of being a father because I'm not one,
Mhm.
and how some things I can't wait to do that are different from what you did.
Mhm.
But with that being said, I think it's more appropriate to kind of let Bill introduce himself. So, Bill, if you want to tell everyone where you're from, first of all.
I am from Albany, Georgia.
Oh, Benny, Georgia.
Albany, depending upon, where I am in the dialect, but, I grew up in South Georgia.
South
Yeah,
Georgia.
yeah.
And then where did you go to college?
West Point,
West Point.
United States Military Academy,
Yeah,
class of
Army.
1986. Courage never quits.
Yep. And then you got your master's degree from
Harvard Business School,
Harvard Business School. Okay.
1995.
Yep, yep, and that was when you had how many kids? When did you start Harvard Business School?
Well, actually, you may remember this,
Mhm.
but, I think between my 1st and 2nd year, you and your sister Jasmine,
We're here.
were profiled along with me in that, admissions pamphlet.
Okay.
So, I think Jasmine was 3, you were maybe 2,
I gotta
from
find
that
that.
standpoint. So, yeah, we had 2,
Yeah.
and we were pregnant with Jordan
Yep,
at the time,
yep.
because she was born, August 21st of my 2nd year.
Yeah. I love how you said we were pregnant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, your mom and I at the time,
Yeah.
it was a family thing, right?
Yeah.
Because, I was a student. I
Yeah.
had literally left the military and, cockpit to the classroom, as
Mm.
you've heard me say before. And your mom was paying for everything from the
Yeah.
standpoint of at least supporting our family
Yeah.
while she was pregnant. And I was riding my bike selling newspaper ads, again, just to make ends meet, but it was a lot of fun.
Before you got to Harvard Business School, did you want to go to business school and continue to further your education?
Um, that was the plan.
Yep.
There was a kind of a roadmap that I had envisioned for myself,
Yeah.
you know, West Point,
Mhm.
military experience, leadership experience, top business school,
Mhm.
and then get on the path to be a Fortune 500 CEO.
Mm.
That was the plan.
Yeah.
And life happens,
Yep.
and we were fortunate enough to get admitted to Harvard, and
Yep.
then I took a sabbatical, a year off. I didn't go in. I was supposed to be in the class of '94,
Mhm.
but I was
Mm.
had gotten out of the Army and was selling angioplasty catheters for a company called Boston Scientific,
Yep. I
and
know
we
Boston,
were
yeah.
making more money than I ever imagined. Because as
Yeah.
an Army captain, even with flight pay,
Mhm.
back then, this is what,
Mhm.
92-ish,
Mhm.
93, $60,000 all in,
Yep.
um, and I thought we were rich then, and then I get accepted to Harvard, and I figured I'd have to get a job, save some money so,
Yep.
we would be able to provide for you guys,
Yep.
and, started selling couches. I was making over $100,000 and I said, "I don't need an MBA from Harvard.
Right,
I'm
right.
making a ton of money."
Mhm.
And, thank goodness, mentors that I spoke to talked me out of that
Kept you on
decision
that path,
and
yeah.
kept me on the path to get to business school.
And so, as you obviously were going through that process of going to business school, you had 1, 2 children, the 3rd on the way.
Mhm.
Going back to that first child, Jasmine, as a man,
Mm.
what was that like when you found out you were gonna be a dad at the place you were in at that point?
I had always wanted to be a dad.
Yeah.
Um, I think one of the things that I was most excited about when we found out we were having a baby was there's a chance for me to be a dad.
Mhm.
I'm a junior,
Mhm.
and my dad, growing up in South Georgia, and it was the 70s,
Mhm.
um, was I think he did the best that he could,
Right.
and I love my father dearly,
Rest in peace.
but he had things that were more important to him at the time,
Mm.
and I think my dad was unhappy because of some life choices that he was forced to make. He was going to go to medical school, and
Yeah.
then his grandmother was tragically killed in a car accident, and
Mm.
so he had to drop out of school
Mhm.
to come take care of the family.
Mm.
And the family business was a flower shop,
Yeah.
and so my dad became a florist not by choice,
Right.
but by he was forced to do it to provide for his family.
Yeah.
His older brothers, weren't in a position to do it, so he had to.
Yeah.
And so I think he was always looking for something, chasing for something, and I think that led to me to believe in one of those things that, man, when I have kids, I can't wait to be there. I'm gonna be active. I'm gonna be
Mm.
because all my sports activities, my parents were never there, and
Mm.
I think you remember, it was an act of Congress or something for me not to be at your guys' sporting events, and so I think that's kind of
Yeah.
once I found out I was gonna be a father, I was
And so you
just
had
very excited.
a girl, Jasmine,
Mhm.
beautiful girl
Jazzy.
today, Jazzy
Yeah.
J, and
Uh-huh.
then you had your first son. What
Yes.
was that like?
Um, to be honest with you, both births were, cathartic for me
Mhm.
because, we your mom and I at the time, we were just praying for a healthy baby.
Right.
That's, I think,
Right.
what any dad wants is a healthy child. And then if I was, gun to my head, would you rather have a son or a daughter? I really didn't have a strong
Mm.
preference. So I just felt so lucky that with Jasmine, then I had a boy and a girl. And if I didn't have any more kids, I had,
One of
one of
each.
each from
Yeah.
that standpoint.
Yeah.
So it was great to have a son.
Mhm.
The noble name was going to continue from that standpoint,
Mhm.
even if you grew up and had children of your own. But yeah, I didn't have a preference necessarily. I was just ecstatic to be a dad.
Yeah. And did you feel a additional sense of responsibility, uh, now that you had kids to work even harder, to be more of a present father, man,
hmm
husband, all these things? Did you feel a stronger sense of, it was like a switch that flipped when you have kids and bring them into the world?
Yeah, I think that paternalistic instinct
Mhm.
goes into hyper overdrive when you have kids, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just you and your mom at the time, who was my wife at the time. With just the two of us, we could do whatever we need to do to survive. But when you have life and responsibilities that are thrust upon you as a parent,
Right.
I think that ratchets up the sense of, I got to make this work from that standpoint. At least
Right.
it did for me,
Mm.
and the desire to provide for you things that I may not have had growing up. And my parents did very well. We were upper middle class in South Georgia. I never wanted for anything,
Mhm.
but I always wanted to ensure that you guys, whatever your desires were, that you always had the opportunity to at least pursue them, and
Mm.
not because, well, we can't afford this. There was a strong sense in me growing up, and then as I become a father, that I never want my kids to have to look to my kids and say, well, we can't afford that.
Mm.
And I know that's materialistic in the origin, but it was important to me from
Yeah.
that standpoint.
Do you feel like that need to provide intersected with, like, your value as a man in this world,
Mhm.
the monetary success you had?
Um, I mean, I'll be honest, I like nice things.
Yeah.
And again, growing up in South Georgia, uh, you know, we may not have had, money, that disposable income that was
Mhm.
endless, but we were always well dressed,
Taken care of.
taken care of, and my grandmother, both of them on paternalistic side and maternalistic side were always ensured that, we looked good. Your
Yeah.
jeans were pressed, had a crease in 'em from that standpoint. We used to iron our T-shirts. This is how I grew up, right? And so when I got in a position to be able to afford nice things, I wanted to be able to, have a nice home,
Yeah.
and you guys have nice things as well. And
Mm.
so I think having children just put more pressure, and I don't want to say pressure in a negative connotation,
Sure.
just a desire and a
Mm.
passion to ensure that I was able to provide for you guys the kind of lifestyle that you never wanted for anything.
When you say pressure, I always think of the advice you give me whenever I call you and I'm struggling or like,
Mhm,
hey, like I feel a lot of pressure in life. You always say, because I think of it sometimes from a glass half
mhm,
empty
mhm.
perspective. And the glass half full side, which is the advice is pressure makes diamonds.
Yes, sir.
And I always think about that when I struggle or when I get into a hard spot. It's like I feel a lot of pressure. And I think what you tell me. And so I can probably understand what you mean there of like that pressure that's added on is like this is good pressure.
Mhm.
This is where we're gonna make a diamond of a family or diamond of, kids' lives or just that goal you have as a father. But yeah, I think that, you know, sometimes I think of like how you saw grandpa raise you and
Mhm.
like that goal of I think most men is to be not like their father,
Mhm.
right? There's attributes that, sometimes you can look at and be like, oh, that was, but a lot of times I feel as if I see people share the sentiment, men, like, I don't want to be anything like my dad
Mhm.
because there are things that they may have missed that were so vitally important to them. And I think in a lot of men, and just when I'm reading and learning, is that paternal love is the strongest type of love because it's
Mhm.
the most absent.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think that's something that, as we get into it today and like this conversation of our relationship and me growing up as a boy to a man,
Mhm.
that is something I craved every day.
Mhm.
And I got it a lot of times. But,
Mm.
we'll get into that in a little bit. But that was just, I think, kind of putting two and two together and something I learned, like the empathy involved with looking at your father, not knowing how he was raised or
Right.
how he learned to digest information or how he learned to be a dad. So I think there's a lot of that we'll talk about. But I think getting back on track of like this timeline of things, I think
Mhm.
Harvard Business School, then where?
Oh, so moved to Dallas, Texas.
Yep.
That's how I became a Cowboys fan. Well, I was a Cowboys fan before, but a real diehard
Yep.
Cowboys fan because 93, 95, they won the Super Bowls,
Hmm.
right? And so that's when we moved to Dallas,
Hmm.
working for a company called McKinsey from that standpoint. So that's
Consulting
where we
firm,
were.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yep.
strategy, global strategy consulting firm.
Wow, okay, and then I was 3 years old, 4 years old at that time?
Yeah, I think so. So Jordan was born.
Mhm,
So we had 3 kids,
mhm,
living in Plano, Texas.
mhm,
And then we moved to Las Vegas.
mhm.
And Jared was born in Las Vegas.
So you had 4 now? Yep.
Yeah,
Mhm.
4 the 4 J's. Jasmine, Jalen, Jordan, and Jared. 2
Yeah,
boys, 2 girls. I mean,
perfect.
just that symmetry that,
Yeah.
we all aspire for
Yeah.
from that standpoint.
Yeah, and I try to think of the most conscious memories I had from, as a kid, and I think there were some Vegas ones in there, like the little neighborhood we had, the friends we had,
Mhm,
like the curiosity I started to have as a kid. Like I remember like our neighbor was my little girlfriend or whatever, and
mhm.
like just running around. And I don't remember maybe like playing soccer in Vegas. I don't remember playing football in Vegas. I think
It was
it
soccer.
was okay. So I was
You
right.
guys
Okay.
started in soccer.
Yep.
Your mom was, loved soccer.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't play soccer
Right.
in South Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the '60s and '70s,
That was soccer wasn't a
soccer
thing.
wasn't a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
It was football, basketball, and baseball
Mm.
from that standpoint. But your mom was adamant that you guys play soccer,
It was-
and you were too young to play football.
yeah.
So
I
I,
always say
I
that like, from my athletic viewpoint, soccer I think is probably one of the strongest sports to play early on because it develops that speed, straight line running, strength, agility, all these things
if you
that
say so.
right. I'll always advocate for that, but again, to each their own.
Yeah.
But I guess that kind of is a good segue into a lot of the conscious memories I had as a child was sporting events,
Mhm,
was my success as an athlete, and I
mhm,
think that's something that looking back on, I remember that was like the glue that held us together.
yeah.
That our relationship was really focused on sports, whether it be, I think back to I think my real first memories was Washington. New
Mhm,
Orleans, I played soccer.
mhm,
I don't remember much football from New Orleans when we lived there because it was
mm.
Vegas, Kansas, New Orleans,
Yes.
then Washington, and this was
Yeah.
all before like when I was in fourth grade. So there
Mhm,
was a lot of moving. But my first like real conscious memories of our relationship, like in love and this idea of it, was sports.
mhm,
In Washington, you were my coach. I loved football. I was
mhm,
playing. I was a star. I think they wrote
mhm,
a newspaper article about me for scoring like 30 something touchdowns in
mhm.
1 year. Um, and it was just, it was a dream for me to be in that position with my dad
Right.
because I looked up to you. I
Mhm,
admired everything you did. I worshiped the ground you walked on. And I thought, oh, this is easy. Like I'm doing so. I don't think I had one bad game that entire year where I didn't score 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns. So this habit or I don't know, like reward system we had or whatever it was, I just remember doing so great. And then we go get a video game and
Mhm.
you kind of
Yeah.
shower me with the gift and that reinforcement that I just was used to being the best athlete, used to doing great in your eyes. And I was like, this is awesome. And then, truthfully, I feel like looking back on it too, there wasn't much of an emotional connection that we established. And I might not remember these things, but
Mhm.
from what I can recall, a lot of it, I guess, what it felt conditional. It felt
Mm.
if I do well in sports, I get my dad's highest, most proudest form of love and admiration and support. And I'm like, I feel like I'm doing something right. But again, I think the basis of our relationship at a young age was glued together by sports and you being present and you always being there, which at the time is amazing on paper,
Mhm.
right? And we moved to Ohio in 5th grade. I think
Yeah.
that's where I started to feel a sense of frustration or
Mm.
anger growing with us or with
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
or with myself. Um, because I felt like those were probably the more difficult as you got older, football gets a little more tough, that you
Oh,
can't
yeah.
stand out as easy as
Yeah,
you
yeah.
usually do, and, that's just life. But I remember there was moments where I didn't understand
Mm.
what I could have done to really feel that unconditional love. I thought it was very conditional.
Mhm.
I began to grow a sense of anger or, I don't know, just discomfort or being uncomfortable with this idea that I'm like, "It's just sports. It's just you and I with sports."
Mhm.
But you were always there, so, like, I felt like I got all your attention, I felt like so I was conflicted. I didn't
Mm.
know how to, so I thought, "Okay, let me just keep doing this," but I remember some of those thoughts, and I remember I would cry because I had to go to football practice, and
Mhm.
I would, like, hide behind mom because I was like, "I don't wanna go, I don't wanna go, I don't wanna go," and looking back on it, I'm trying to understand, from a father's perspective,
Mm.
when you see your son or see your kids and the glue that held us together being sports, if you remember differently, but where was the emotional connection for you?
I think you romanticize
Mhm,
what a father-son or father-daughter relationship is, because
mhm,
again, my dad was he worked 12, 14 hours a day, and then he would go hang out,
right,
you know, uh, in the streets, as we used to say in the South, right? And so I grew up my mom
mhm,
raised us for the most part, right? And so I didn't really have a what I would consider a prototypical role model for what a dad should be.
mhm,
So I was kind of making it up as I went along from that standpoint. And so because I loved football and loved sports in general, that was easy for me to use that as a vehicle to express my, exhilaration when you guys were doing great or my frustration when things didn't necessarily go so well
mm,
because it was easier for me to use sports
right,
versus communicating feelings
mhm,
and expressing feelings that didn't have role model for me. And
right,
this is not an excuse, but
right,
so it was something that I really didn't attack head on
mm,
because it was always easier to use sports as that proxy from
yeah.
that standpoint and rewarding great behavior. And, I remember in Washington, we used to listen to Mystical,
Oh, yeah.
from in the car and just, you know, 4th and 4, "F
Yeah,
and right,
fucking
I'm
right, I'm
going
going
for it
for it,
for it,"
yeah.
from that standpoint. So to me, I just thought that sports was just the great equalizer with regard to helping you grow up and mature as a man, right?
Mm,
Because, there's a great Tom Brady just gave a great
yeah,
speech the other night about football is hard, so many life lessons learned from football. So, because I love football and I wanted you to love football, it was, I think, a easy cop out for me to
mm,
use sports. And I think, talking about my relationships with your sisters,
mhm,
that was probably one of the biggest regrets that I have as a father, that I didn't have that same sports as an entree to develop those relationships. So it was hard for
yeah,
me to develop relationships with Jazz and Jordan when they were younger because there wasn't that sports. They weren't into
right,
sports necessarily.
right,
They played basketball and volleyball and soccer and these things, but they were more, they had other interests. And for me, it was, well, this is hard
mm,
because it's not something that's I love and something easy for me to use as a proxy. But that's right, wrong, or indifferent. I think
Yeah.
I took the easy way out sometimes and
Mhm.
used football and sports as that proxy.
I do remember those Washington days and,
Mhm,
literally, like I said earlier, like, I'd get a video game if I scored a bunch of touchdowns and I come
mhm,
home, and when you mentioned this, my siblings, I often now think, I'm like, "How did they see that?"
mhm,
You know, I'd go to a game and they were playing sports like soccer, Jordan, like you
mhm,
said, and you didn't show up to those games,
mhm,
you didn't show up to those practices, and on the other side, they're seeing me have that entire attention
mhm,
and being rewarded for it, and so, I don't wanna speak for them, but, I'm reading a book by bell hooks, and it's an amazing book that I've kind of talked about a little bit.
mhm,
And there's this idea of paternal love and how valuable it is
mhm,
for that young boy or young girl. And when a lot of children don't get that, there's this huge hole in their heart that they don't know how to fill.
mhm,
They feel, and I don't want to, like, I guess I'll paraphrase, but it opened my mind to really understand the absence of your distribution of love and attention, how it impacted Jasmine, Jordan,
mhm.
and even Jared. But the focus of attention and the vehicles in which you used, how it impacted me as well. And I think about that, and I back then, obviously I loved every second of your attention I got because I
Mhm,
thought I was doing something right. I thought this was it.
mhm,
This is my father's love, and I'm gonna keep fighting for it because that means I needed to show up to football and sign up and do all these sports and do these camps because that's what my dad wants me to do, right? And so I
mhm,
think through that same vehicle and how easy it was easy for me to exist and find out who I was from a young age by doing what you wanted me to do or
yeah,
following the guidance you were pushing me to. And I never really got a chance to really understand who I was. And again, that's hard to say because, as a kid, you really don't know, but you're learning, you're curious. And I think that's one of the things I look back is like, I don't know if I ever really got to be curious.
mm,
I think it was, this is what we're doing.
yep,
We're gonna go, and I got fortunate because I was arguably always the best athlete on most fields I stepped
mm,
on and can
mm,
get away with it. But I don't know if I ever really got the chance to be curious. And that's something I always think about. Like, where would my life be or how different would it be looking back in hindsight 2020?
yeah,
But, I think I turned out pretty good. But yeah, I often
mhm,
think about that stage of how we were glued together through sports
mhm,
and the evolution of like the real missing link of emotional connection
yeah,
that we had. And as it started from fifth grade, sixth grade on when we were in Ohio and starting. And, and I think of Jasmine and Jordan, you know, wanting and craving that attention
mhm,
and showing it in ways that I think were hard to emotionally understand for anybody. That not having you there made them not want to play.
right,
Not having you there made them rebel,
mhm,
cry for attention, which is not a bad thing, but they just wanted that love. And I think looking back on it, sometimes I think like, man, I can't even begin to wonder what it was like for them
yeah,
to see that, to see me be unconsciously selfish with your love and attention. Like it wasn't something that I was choosing, but getting.
mhm,
But I think as that evolution continued in that sixth, seventh grade, eighth grade comes around, I realized that I started to dislike football,
mhm,
dislike sports because I didn't have that connection that I was craving.
mhm,
There's still something deep inside me that I couldn't find.
mhm,
And I think of mom and I think of that relationship and this book that I always reference in life in the last like week of my life.
mm,
It's, I took advantage of her love, but I knew her love was unconditional
mm,
and I could get away with anything with mom, but I knew no matter if I failed, won, if I was scared of you, if I was running behind her, like I don't want to go, she was going to help me try to be there for me. And I think as seventh, eighth grade, ninth grade rolls on, 10th grade, getting into high school and still being the best athlete out there,
mhm,
I was missing a huge part of your love
mhm,
that I didn't know how to understand or how to, I guess, digest, but I thought I was doing something right because I was doing well in sports and you were there.
mhm,
But I think at that point is when I really started to grow anger,
mm,
anger as a boy towards you that I would take out on mom a lot,
Mhm.
but I started to grow anger for you because yeah, I felt as if I failed, you didn't know who I was.
Mm.
That celebrate, that reward system we talk about was so high that the opposite was so low that I felt that louder than these highs.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I really struggled with and just it started to really grow a sense of anger towards you.
Mhm.
But I was still doing something right because the average or the end of the day, I was still best football player, starting to get, college offers,
Mhm.
recognize things that, on paper look great for you to share because it was easy. It was the reward. It was the result of you putting us in a system of football to help us grow and mature as men and boys. But I've always been curious as a father, as a man, when you look at someone like myself who may not have shown these things, do you think there was anything uh, you would have done differently?
Oh, yeah. I mean, tons of things I would have done differently. I think part of it was out of selfishness, and it's a horrible thing to say as a
Mhm,
father, but there was a selfish side of me that took an easy way out because it was easy for me to relate to you
mhm.
in football because it was a common,
Yeah.
I thought at the time, a common love that we both had for the sport, right? And so I think I was selfish in the sense that I didn't feel I had to put the time and energy and effort into getting to know you
Mm,
on a level in all of your interests because I just assumed
mhm,
that football was hey, it's a passion of mine. It's got to be a passion of yours. You're so good at it. And so it was an easy way out
yeah,
from that standpoint. And I think that was manifested obviously in a lack of my ability to relate with Jasmine and
mhm,
Jordan on that visceral level because I just there was no sports as a conduit, right? And so that meant I would had to work hard. And at the time, I was putting so much energy and time into my career. Your mom and I had gotten a divorce, right?
mhm,
So I was just in a kind of an awkward phase in my own life that
mhm,
I think it resulted in me taking shortcuts.
mhm,
And so the regrets that I have, unfortunately, I didn't, at the time, there was no such thing, or at least I didn't appreciate nor understand the benefits of therapy and
mm,
getting to know what was wrong with me,
mm,
what was missing in my life that I put so much energy, time, and effort into you from a football perspective. And I wish that I would have done that earlier or spent time talking to people to understand what it is about me that resulted in me showing up the way I did as a father.
yeah.
I loved you guys
Oh,
unconditionally.
I
I
know.
mean, the love was always
Yeah,
there. And how I showed it was kind of effed up
mm,
sometimes. And it was an inability to articulate kind of how I truly felt because my dad was very stoic.
mm.
I mean,
So that's how you
literally
learned,
on
yeah.
one hand, I'm 60 years old now, but growing up on one hand, I can remember five times he told me he loved me.
Mm,
When I graduated from West Point,
mm,
and a couple other times, childhood, but
yeah,
um, and so I didn't know how to articulate that or how to have those conversations, right?
mm,
Um, the romantic love,
mm.
I was always able to articulate that from that standpoint because my father was a womanizer, right?
Yeah,
That's grandma will tell you,
yeah,
right? And so seeing that as what the value of a manhood is, your ability to have, all these
women lust
adulation
over
from
you.
women on that
Yeah,
standpoint was again what I saw, what I thought was normal.
mhm.
Um,
And how would
and
you know any different, right?
yeah, we're all a product of our
Yeah,
environment to a
right.
certain extent. I'm not using that as an excuse or a
But
cop
it's
out,
valid, yeah.
but we are.
Yep.
And so when you're faced with the realities of, a divorce
Mm.
because of failed marriage, and you didn't see that growing up. You it's kind of like, well, I gotta rethink a lot of things about my life.
It's funny you say that because, when we think about or when you mention, like, the romantic side versus, like, our relationships and your relationship with mom, like, even as a kid, I remember, like, I viewed marriage very differently than I do now.
Mhm,
I view it as, my most of my memories from my childhood were the house was mom's domain. That's where
mm,
she reigned supreme.
mhm,
You weren't there most of the week,
mhm,
but, when it came to my practices, like you said when we first started this, you went above and beyond to be there and show up.
mhm,
And I often think, there was a lot of emotional love, emotional communication, and articulation missing from my childhood to see you
mhm,
verbalize these things to mom. And like we talked to the siblings about this all the
mhm,
time, but this might be just me misremembering, but I don't remember a lot of times where we would just sit there and you would grab mom and like
mhm,
tell her you love her and hold her and like show that affection. So I think to your point, that part of your environment, I feel like that showed a lot of ways to me how I needed to be a man. I needed to be stoic. I needed to be I needed to work hard. My manhood was proved by how proud my dad was of me. My
mhm.
manhood was proud was going to form in the identity that my dad created for me. My
Right.
manhood was going to be formed in this womanizer concept
Mhm,
of if I have more girls like me or love me, or if I can be a player, like that's kind of the, with the amongst the boys, it was my manhood elevated. And I always kind of learned that way. But I think there's ways when I think of marriage now and love and articulating it that I've been trying to unlearn and relearn. And I think over the last, 3, 4 years, I've learned a lot. And I think about your relationship with my mom
mhm.
and our relationship and just the importance of articulation.
Yeah, it's something I'm still working on
Yeah.
today, right? Even, with Laura Lee,
Mhm.
my current wife and Trey's mom. I just grew up during those impressionable years. I
Mm,
never saw it demonstrated in my
mm.
home. My dad was just not my dad. A, he wasn't there. He would come home 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. We were asleep, right?
Yeah.
So and it was the mom's love,
Mm,
similar to what you experienced, was kind of the glue that held everything together.
yeah.
And with Laura Lee and I today, with Trey, right? She reigns supreme in the home.
Mhm.
I'm home a lot more because my job doesn't require that I travel as much as when I was, when we were growing up as a family. And so there are opportunities that I want to say I should do this,
Mm,
but I just don't know how.
mm.
And I know that's West Point, Harvard, MBA. You're smart enough to figure it out, Bill.
Yeah.
But it's just been tough for me to do that.
Yeah.
And it's not because a lack of a desire and a want to. It's just old habits die hard,
Mm,
incredibly hard from
mm.
that standpoint.
And I know you have Trey. Trey's about to turn 15 now,
Mhm,
so he very much was in the same positions that I were in or was in or the other kids. But I often think of and I always go back to Jordan.
mhm.
I think that's one, and Jasmine mainly, but speaking of articulating, this might be a little hard. If the younger version of Jordan or Jasmine were right here next to you,
Mhm.
what would you say to them right now?
That I love them
Yeah.
first and foremost, and take more of myself from the standpoint of what interests you.
Mm,
Um, you know, um, so many times I didn't show up for them
mm,
because I got to work responsibility. I got to travel.
mhm,
It was easy for me to find a way to come back for football,
mhm.
but I would always justify, well, that recital or this event wasn't that important.
Right.
There'll be plenty more of those, but that was my warped sense of right and wrong at the time.
Mm,
And I was able to justify it. Well, I can't take this time off. But I always found a way to take the time off when it came to you and football. And then later when Jared in
yeah.
football as well,
Yeah.
because Jared was a late bloomer,
Yeah.
right? His middle school years, he was, and he'll tell you
The
if he
short
was
little
a
pudgy guy.
short,
Yeah.
pudgy guy, right? And I was like, this is Jared, this nigga, my son, but I, he obviously looks like just like me from that
Yeah.
standpoint.
Like you
So,
spit him out,
but,
literally.
but he blossomed,
Yeah.
his high school years, right? And
Mhm.
it's amazing how Bill came back around,
Yep.
from that standpoint.
Yep.
Again, making the same mistakes that I made with you, but not to the extent, because I had learned a little bit
Right.
from the mistakes that I made with you. But with Jasmine, and Jordy, we're here right now. I tell them, first of all, I love them.
Yeah.
And I wish I had a chance to do it over again, because there were some things I would do
Yeah.
very, very differently with the girls.
Mm.
Than I think with you guys, again, that toughness, again, football is a tough sport. I want you guys to be hard from that standpoint, and want to push you to never settle, to always, achieve and win, right? Because I always viewed life as a win-lose proposition, right?
Yeah.
Because you keep scoring football, right?
Right.
And so it manifested itself into you win, lose in life. And so I thought somewhat naively that I was teaching you guys great lessons about being tough, win and don't cry, all that, those, those old anecdotes about tough,
Yeah.
men don't cry and these other things. But looking back on it now, and unfortunately, I'm still making some of those same mistakes with Trey.
Yeah.
I mean, and he'd be the first to tell you from that standpoint.
Yeah.
He had a game last night. Literally, I was, and I'm up in the stands. Great move, shakes the guy, gets to the lane, floater, and he misses. And my natural tendency is, my gosh, if he would have taken those 300 shots that I've been forcing him to take, he would have made that shot. Rather than celebrating the fact that the kids made the team.
Yeah.
He's, at Moeller, with very competitive school, and he's on the court and he's playing, and he made a great move. I couldn't see, it's just how I'm wired.
Yeah.
I can't see the fact that the move and the shot, I only saw, make or miss. And it's not, it shouldn't be like that.
And it's funny you say that, because when I think of you in the stands, and this sense of like anger, frustration brewing in me, started to hate football, despise football. I think when I was a sophomore, maybe a junior in high school, I realized I didn't like football. I outgrew my love for football. And as hard as it is to say, like, I think ultimately came down because of you. I think, before games, that stand analogy is like, I remember you'd get there an hour before the game. And it's awesome to have your father show up and support, because a lot of people don't have that. It's all subjective in how we digest that presence. But that same presence was one, I knew where you were sitting, and I was so nervous to make you proud of me by having a good game. I was so anxious to do good for you, not for myself, not for my team, not for my coaches, none of it, for you, that when I would make a bad play, first place I'd look, right up in those stands where I knew you were. If I made a great play, first place I'd look, right up in the stands where you were. Sometimes when I made a good play, I didn't have to look, because I knew in the back of my head was like, my dad's proud of me. I have this cape on. I'm Superman right here. But when I failed, I let you down. And that was what failure felt like, because through sports was our vehicle of connection.
That hits hard, because Trey does the same thing. Last night, and Laura Lee hates it. Because immediately, the first thing he does, make or miss, is look up. And she says he knows where you are from that standpoint.
It got to a point where I wish you weren't there sometimes. Like, I wish you weren't at my games. Like, as hard as that is to say, I would have felt more comfortable probably with you not there.
No, and I understand it. Because, she was, got into my ass last night when we got home, because of, you can see it manifested on his behavior, his body language, when he's looking up. And I'm assuming I was 10 times worse with you. It's just, I can't help it. That physical.
Well, you can.
You're right. I couldn't help it
I'll
at the time.
challenge you there,
Yeah, I could, and I can certainly help it now, because I go into it with every intention from that standpoint. But, when you were growing up in those impressionable years, it was, you can tell just by looking at where I was and that intensity. And it wasn't out of a critical nature. I wanted you just to be so successful, right? And I thought mistakenly that you wanted that same thing, right? That D1 offer from a big time program.
And I think that's where, like, it leads to this continued evolution is, out of high school, I committed to Air Force. I had a few other MAC school offers or interest. Even not loving football, I still thought I need to go play college football. That's my way to continue to be a man, is to be Bill, is to be you. And didn't work out at Air Force. being at Air Force Academy, a military school, great institution. I was at the
Mm.
prep school, so I had like an in-between year.
Mhm.
I remember you still showing up every game and that same feeling. I was throwing up before games. My senior
Mm.
year in high school, before Air Force games, I was throwing up because I was so nervous you were there. I was that nervous. And I wasn't nervous because I was going to get beat.
Yeah.
It wasn't I was afraid to let you down. And that made me physically become ill.
Mhm.
I would throw up before games. And after that one or two throw ups, I'd be okay. I go back out there and be like, okay, nerves are a little gone. I'm okay. But that followed me around, and that sense of like failing you was so loud in my mind and so loud in my life that when it came to Air Force, I transferred to West Point,
Mhm.
your alma mater,
Yeah.
because I thought my dad is jumping through hoops, showing me so much attention by me expressing this interest in West Point and going and
Mhm.
playing football and following in his footsteps. So everything I've felt uncomfortable about, like it's just a me thing. I don't know how to express these things to him, but this is obviously just the flight of a child or boy to a man is, I'm uncomfortable, but this is what my dad wants, so it has to be right. This is how I get his love and attention. And I think at that point in my life, I started to build up this sense of failure in myself. I
Mhm.
started to see myself as a failure because I got to West Point and I hated it.
Mhm.
That was not where I needed to be.
Mm.
And I realized then, and I don't actually think I realized, but I realized that this was not my path in life, that I didn't need to be you. I couldn't say it out loud because I was so scared to let you down. I was still at
Mhm.
such a young age, at 20, 21, an impressionable age, that I got to a point where I just wanted your attention and love more than anything,
Mhm.
than just trying to go to a college and make you proud that, and I've shared this on the internet before, but, you know, I I never really understood that my cries for help showed up in the way that they did, because
Mm.
I didn't know how else to get your attention.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't know how else to get your attention, and, um, there was a point at West Point that, I just got a concussion. I was going through, some other things. I wasn't going to school, obviously, like I couldn't, that I felt like a failure, and
Mhm.
I thought my life was worthless
Mhm.
because we didn't have that emotional connection, but this path that you paved for me, I was off of it, and I couldn't get back on it, nor did I want to.
Mhm.
And it got to a point where I decided my life wasn't worth living,
Mhm.
and knowing that I wasn't you, knowing that I couldn't be you, I didn't wanna be.
Mm.
And I remember that call and that choice I made. It was a conscious choice to try to take my life.
Mhm.
And looking back on it, I believe it was truly a cry for help, that I just wanted you to love me,
Mhm.
love Jalen. And I always think, like I think and go back and think about our relationship and like why I got to that point, but I wonder how you viewed that as a father, seeing your son go to those extremes or go to that place.
Um, it was, I kicked myself because I missed all those signs.
Mm.
It was your plebe year, right? And none of us like West Point
Mhm.
plebe year.
Mm-mm.
And we just, I, it was so easy for me to say, oh, it's just West Point.
Mhm.
It's just plebe year. Nobody likes plebe year. He's going to
Mhm.
grow out of it. He'll be fine. You were playing varsity as a freshman, and so I thought in my own mind, I thought you were just going through a phase,
Mm.
right? Let's just plebe year. He'll grow out of it, get more. And I missed everything.
Mm.
I was so happy that you were at West Point playing
Mhm.
football and following my footsteps. And I got on this, man, I'm gonna get to go back to the academy every weekend for home games and all this other stuff. Trey was 3, and from that standpoint, Jared was still in
Yeah.
high school. And so in my mind, I'm saying,
Top of
man,
the
I'm gonna
world.
have 3 kids
Yeah.
coming to Army and playing football from that standpoint. And man, I just missed it.
Yeah.
I just really missed, and I don't know what role the concussions played in it, because
Sure.
CTE is real.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that played in the emotional state that you were in, but son, I just missed it. I missed all of those signs. I didn't understand the depth of your unhappiness.
Mm.
I just, again, looking at it through the lens that I was looking at it. I just thought that it was a phase you were going through, and
Mhm.
I just fucking missed it.
Mm.
And
What do you think I needed to hear most from you?
oh, that I loved you no matter what, and it should have been way earlier
Mm.
than Army. It
Mhm.
should have been, when you were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Again, just constantly taking shortcuts as a
Mm.
dad and not taking the time to know if you liked football
Yeah.
or if you loved it. I always thought that you did because you were so damn good at it, right? And you can't not love something that you're so
Good at.
excelled at.
Yeah.
Um, and then in high school with the throwing up, again, plenty of athletes talk
Mhm.
about, well, I would throw up from that standpoint.
Mm.
I thought it was just nerves of performance. I didn't know it was because I was in the stands, right? And
Mm.
so again, you probably manifested so many signals and signs that had I been in tune
Mm.
with who you were as a person, I would have picked up on it from that standpoint. But
Yeah,
I
and I
just,
think that product or environment comment you had, it was being replicated in
mhm,
those. We didn't have that growing up where I could talk about my feelings open with you and
mhm,
say, "Hey, I'm struggling," or "Hey, that I emotionally don't express my emotions."
mhm,
And I think that was something that was missing in my childhood that I didn't know was a safe place for me to express those things to you.
mhm.
And knowing that and feeling that, I didn't think that was a choice.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I struggled with as a child, as a boy, was I didn't have a safe place to express my emotions with my father.
Mhm,
And that I would express my emotions in very unhealthy ways and cry for helps in these attempts. I remember after that I was still in a very dark place because I'll never forget, like, I was in critical care in the ICU
yeah,
for a day, and I remember waking up and the first person I saw was mom. I remember get to the room and you show up and I'm like, there was a little bit of affirmation there. I was like, my dad does care about me.
mhm.
My dad does care for me, regardless of football.
Well, again,
Mhm.
um, I was at a offsite retreat with my leadership team,
Yeah.
and Jasmine called me,
Mm.
and shout out to your sister.
Yeah.
Jazz took steps that day that that saved your life, man,
Yeah.
because was she knew something was wrong, and she called the barracks, and they went and checked on you, right? Because it could have been very easy for her just
I
to,
didn't know this.
yeah,
Mm.
Jazzy saved your life, man. I mean, because I was in a meeting. You
Yeah.
didn't call me, you called her, and she said, "Something's wrong, something's wrong." And she,
I remember that phone call.
yeah,
I called her, after I did what I did. I remember laying down in the bed and just, called her and said, "I'm sorry."
yeah, and God bless her,
Yeah.
because she saved your life, man. And she called me, and I literally ran out of the room. I didn't tell
Anybody.
none of them anything,
Yeah.
and my boss's boss was in that room, and I was
Gone.
gone.
Mm.
And Laura Lee, what's the fastest way for me to get to New York? We thank God we got a flight. I literally drove straight to the airport. She got me on the flight. I got into Newark, and I rented a car and drove up to West
Mm.
Point. And it was it was the most surreal. I can't even think about it, but going into that ICU and seeing you with the intubated and all these other things, uh, I know there are other parents that have gone through it, but at the time, I just felt like such a failure as a father
Mm.
that what did I miss? Because I remember that drive. I was calling Laura Lee. I think I tried to call your mom to say, what did I miss? Was this my fault? What did I
Mm.
do? What didn't I do?
Mm.
What should I have done differently? Um, and we didn't know whether you were gonna make it or not, right? And so, but through God's grace, you did.
Mhm.
Uh, and again, Big shout out to Jazzy because,
Yeah. Mhm.
but it was,
I just found that out. Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
your sister literally, um, you know, your sisters, Jasmine and Jordan, are two of the strongest women I know.
Mhm.
Your mom,
Mm.
Laura Lee,
Mhm.
my mom, my grandmother.
Mhm.
I've been surrounded by
Mhm.
strong women, my whole life from that standpoint. But where I defaulted to the women in my life because they were so strong, your mom and now Laura Lee and my mom, I just, it was, again, taking the easy way out,
Yeah.
letting them be responsible for the emotional side of things
Mhm.
because I didn't want to take the time to learn how to be
Mm.
expressive with my feelings because
Mm.
I thought feelings or the fact that I was there or the fact that I was, providing a great home, that was what love was. I just didn't know.
Yeah. I feel like that's, a miss in a lot of family dynamics is that paternal emotional connection, communication,
Mhm.
conversation that I know I have a lot of friends, men and women, who have expressed their sentiment that they wish their father would have been more vocal
Mhm.
and outspoken with their love and emotional side because they were there, physically. If
Mhm.
you're fortunate enough, they were there to provide in other ways that they were taught how to
Mhm.
provide. To your point, that I sit there and I kind of just, to your point about your dad and, wanting to do things a little different, that's how I look at it.
Mhm.
I think about, and it feels like a different life that I lived, and I was reborn in a way after that
Mhm.
experience that, I can look back and say, I know what I need to do as a man, as
Mhm.
a father, as a husband that I may not have gotten as a kid,
Mhm.
but I know it can be so powerful for the development of love, of children,
Right.
of how we support kids in this world and let them grow up curious and fearless
Mhm.
because they have the support from not only mom but dad.
Mhm.
And sports can be a fun thing to connect over, but I think this is how I look back on this situation. And I've forgiven you and myself for that,
Mhm.
and everyone else or whoever. I know a lot of it has to do with me, um, but I know that I held a lot of it against you for years,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I years that
Understandably so.
went on, and even after West Point, I moved back home with mom and was sitting there and like just I still felt like a failure. I felt like my life was still over. I was just going to exist
Mhm.
and not have that relationship with you that I had my whole life, like that conditional reminder
Right.
that I felt was always there. And I think after that, I even tried to play football again at Miami, Ohio, because I was
Mhm.
like, I need my dad's love. I
Right.
need to find
Right.
that. And this is even after my cry for help. And even after this, I still don't feel it.
Mhm.
I know he showed up, but I don't feel this love.
Mhm.
It's not expressed. It's not, and I often think about like the younger version of myself, and I get really emotional because I think he just needed
Yeah.
a hug from you.
The the there were plenty of physical hugs,
Mhm,
but that emotional hug
mhm,
was not there from
mhm.
that standpoint, and I think that, again, um, our relationship has gotten stronger over the
Yeah,
years,
yeah,
because I think I learned how to appreciate you for who you were,
right.
that you weren't me,
Mm,
thank God,
mm,
that you were developing into this beautiful person, um, both inside and out, right? Because again, my so narrow-minded sense of success as a man. I mean, you were good looking,
mm.
all the girls, right? Knocking them down, as we used to say, right? And I'm saying, oh, this kid's living a charmed life, right?
Mhm,
And I just missed it.
mm.
And the relationship over the years has matured and blossomed because I'm able to relate to you on a level as who you are.
How do you think it got there?
Um, I think it was. I wish there was. I could tell you there was an aha moment,
Mhm,
but there obviously the scare that we had
Mhm.
was an aha moment, a wake up call.
Mhm.
Um, and I think just seeing you struggle to find yourself and knowing that football was no longer an avenue, that I
Mhm.
had to find some other way to connect with you. So you knew that come hell or high water, I had your back
Mm.
from that standpoint. Not just financial support, but emotional support.
Mhm.
Um, I think I just learned that lesson over time in
Yeah.
the hard way. And I think, Laura Lee was instrumental in that, in
Mm.
helping me understand because I felt like such a failure and I felt uncomfortable around you because I felt like it was my fault that you went through that. And my God, this kid must resent the hell out of me from that
Mm.
standpoint. And she would constantly remind me, um, as well as your mom,
Yeah.
just be there. And you don't have to have all the answers because at the end, business, everything else, I've always had the answers planned, boom, boom, boom. But I didn't have the answers in this situation.
Yeah.
And so just trial and error in supporting you
I think
got
that
us there.
for me, it was felt in ways that I was connecting with my father by communicating my feelings, communicating the frustrations I had. 'Cause I remember we had some, and it would be through my siblings.
Mhm,
Remember Trey, I forget what age he was, but when I went to Miami, Ohio, after West Point and things,
mhm,
I wasn't playing football after I did a small spring session or whatever. But I remember Trey had his football, basically, it's almost one of his first years playing where you were
mhm,
going to be the coach.
mm,
And I saw myself and Trey in that dynamic. And I was the assistant
mhm,
coach that showed up
yeah,
because for what I couldn't get from you in those years of my childhood, I knew Trey needed that extra voice, that extra level of support because I knew that you couldn't change overnight. And
mhm,
the gap that I felt between us at that moment, I put that aside because I thought, this is my little brother.
mhm,
He's not going to be like me.
yeah,
He's not going to be like Bill.
mhm,
He's got to be Trey. I saw with Jared, and I think there was a lot of ways that I found healing in those expressions of being present, seeing you from the outside in,
mhm,
not being on the direct other side of that hard conversation that I wasn't ready to have. Because it took me 5, 6 years to accept what I did, accept the place in life that I got to, and I was still confused as to why I got there. But I think in this, like, greater, I don't know, psychological psychology of a paternal love and the impact it has on a family, on a boy, on a girl, and the development is so crucial that I know that absence of that
yeah,
greatly impacted my life. But I came to peace with that because my life isn't over. I still have a chance to learn, to grow. And I don't know if it was like this idea that I was taught at like 22, 23, 24, 25 as age, like I had to have things figured out. And I was battling that constantly. And I was like, I don't know who I am. I spent 24 or 5 years of my life trying to be you,
mhm,
that I didn't know who I was. I knew I was a lover. I knew I loved people. I knew I loved expression. I knew I loved connecting with people, hugging people,
mhm,
feeling and supporting and grabbing people to become that was who I was. And I think as I started to explore that, I realized that, okay, I'm starting to understand who I am.
mhm,
But I wish, and hindsight 2020, I never want to hold anything against you or mom in that sense, but I wish as a kid I would have had that level of support,
mhm,
level of comfort, level of unconditional love that I think a me that I so desperately needed it for my father.
mhm,
But you're right, our relationship has blossomed, and
mhm,
I'm so thankful that because I'm able to call you and shoot the shit and
mhm,
talk, and I think it's been really healthy for me. And what really helped and was instrumental for me in that was expressing myself,
mhm,
saying, "Hey, I didn't. It hurt when you did this.
mhm,
I see you doing it with my little brother. I see you doing it with my sisters. Why weren't you there for them?"
mhm,
And I realized that it started off the wrong because I was poking you. I
mhm,
remember like those conversations I had with you when I was in Miami. I was done with you. I was done with. I don't need my dad.
mhm,
I don't. So I'm going to call him and poke him because I need to remind him how much I can't stand him, how much I
mhm,
resent him. But I'm going to make sure my siblings are okay.
mhm,
I'm gonna step up. I'm gonna be the man. And it was so much frustration, anger, and that I just had that built up and resented, but that aha moment for me was that idea of empathy. I think I learned empathy later in life,
Mhm.
and I lacked it, and forgiveness,
Mhm.
that I can't control how you were raised or things you didn't know how to do because it's the same thing for me. I didn't know how to do any of those as a kid either. As I grew up, I wouldn't have been able to. But I think the empathy that I had for the situation in which you grew up in, the only way you knew how, started to make sense. It's like, okay, that makes sense to me. I can be a little more graceful with and who you are.
Mhm.
And so I think, just expressing myself in that way truly helped
Yeah.
as it evolved into, I forgive you.
Mhm.
I love you.
Mhm.
And our relationship have never been stronger.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I
Grace.
think, yeah, anyone out there who is struggling with the relationship with their father, the best form that I found in healing our relationship was communicating my feelings.
Mhm.
Because I held on to them and I knew if I didn't express them, it was going to drive me crazy or it was just going to continue to keep us at odds.
Mhm.
But for you, I think accepting that and allowing me to express myself was amazing for me to see because you started to change. You
Mhm.
started to show signs of change of
Mhm.
your goal to be different. I still think you got some work to do.
Oh, yeah.
But
Your sister Jordan,
mhm,
Jazz, Jared, I mean, Trey, all of them. I'm a work in progress, and I think that for me,
yeah.
that's the grace and the opportunity to do so, become a better father
And
is what I'm working on.
the last thing I'll leave us with as we close down, what advice do you have for men, women out there, mainly men who are becoming fathers, as they look to fatherhood for the
Mm.
first time or to reevaluate their place as a father? What advice would you have for them from what you've
Uh,
learned in your life?
there is no playbook.
Mhm.
You're gonna make mistakes, and give yourself grace, and get to know your kids,
Mm.
uh, all facets, and find out what motivates them, what turns them on,
Mm.
and then embrace that and support that with 100% of not only financial support but emotional support is so critically important.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice,
Yeah.
because you're going to make mistakes. Give yourself grace and love your kids unconditionally.
Yeah. That's powerful. Well, that's it for today. That's just, I think, probably part one of I'm sure, future conversations we'll have. But yeah, I thought this was an appropriate time to talk to people and just continue to share my view, thoughts, feelings in my own
Mhm.
life. And I think this conversation with my dad has been brewing and had in private for a long time, but I think we've had our ups and downs and gotten to a really healthy place over the time. And so I just want to say I love you
No,
and I appreciate you as a father and as a man in this world and who you were for me in my life, who you are going to be. And I can't wait to continue to build our relationship at this point in my life. That
oh,
is what I look forward to most.
I love the man that you've become, the person you've become. Um, and it's been a blessing watching you find your place in
Mm.
this world. And even as at 31 years old, I still want to protect you from that standpoint. But you're in a good place, and
Mm.
just keep being you, no matter what the hell happens, no matter what feedback you get. Keep being you and be true to who you are, because you're never going to please
Everybody.
everybody.
Right.
Please the ones that love you. Be tolerant, embrace, and accepting of everyone. But you got a powerful platform,
Mm.
uh, and use it to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And only come at it from a place of love. Um, what's wrong with that?
Yeah. That's so true. Well, that's all we have for you today. Inside the mind of a father trying in this world and learning. And I think that's a beautiful place to end on. So thank you for
Mhm.
joining. I can't wait to have this conversation again and future conversations to have in this format. But yeah, I will keep sharing. I will keep being myself and
Please do.
I will
The world needs it.
yeah. I appreciate you guys for listening this far and thank you for being here, Bill. I love you and can't wait to see how Trey and everyone else in the family develops with what we've learned and what you learned. It's probably the most healing part of my journey is seeing how you are learning.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's just the beginning, man.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. Thank you guys.